HOA Karen hired surveyors to steal my land, so I dumped 6 tons of manure on her yard. I've been living in my home for 10 years now. This land, this plot, this corner of the world, it's mine. I've put time, effort, and care into maintaining my yard. My trees, my garden, my flowers, and my fence, everything is just the way I want it. But for Karen, my neighbor and president of the local HOA, none of that seemed to matter. In fact, she seemed to believe that she owned everything in the neighborhood, especially my land. Over the years, I've dealt with her complaints. First, she bitched about my fence being too tall by a few inches. Then it was my trees, which supposedly cast too much shade on her pristine lawn. Then she tried to pressure me into repainting my house to match the HOA-approved color palette. It's been one thing after another, but nothing quite as blatant as this. One day, I came home and saw a group of surveyors standing on my property. They were out there measuring and scribbling notes, seemingly without a care in the world. I walked up to them, feeling a knot of unease in my stomach. "Hey, what are you doing on my property?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. One of the surveyors, a tall man in a suit, turned and handed me some paperwork.
You need to review this. HOA has filed a request to adjust the property boundaries.
I scanned the documents, and sure enough, the HOA was claiming that part of my land actually belonged to them. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But then again, who else would have instigated this move but Karen? This was her doing, no doubt about it. I walked straight to Karen's house, my heart pounding. She was standing in her front yard with her arms crossed and that smug smile plastered on her face. She looked like a cat that had just eaten the canary. "What's going on, Karen?" I demanded, trying to keep my temper in check. "You've got surveyors on my land, and now you're trying to take it from me?" Karen just smirked, not an ounce of guilt in her expression.
"Oh, calm down. It's just a formality,"
she said dismissively, waving her hand like it was no big deal.
"The HOA just wants to get the paperwork in order. We're improving the neighborhood, and that involves updating the boundaries."
"Improving? You're stealing my land?" I couldn't believe the audacity. "This is my property, Karen. You have no right to it." Karen shrugged, unfazed by my anger.
"It's not stealing. It's just better planning. Besides, everyone else is in favor of it,"
she said, her tone patronizing.
"And it's not like you're going to fight it, are you? My lawyers are a lot stronger than yours."
I stood there, seething. It was clear that Karen thought she had this all figured out, but I wasn't about to let her walk all over me. I couldn't let this go. I immediately hired a lawyer to help me look into the situation. After a few days of research, my lawyer uncovered something shocking. Karen had forged signatures from my neighbors to prove that everyone was on board with the boundary changes. I couldn't believe it. She had literally faked their approval. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went to visit my neighbors, and most of them had no idea what was going on. They were appalled by Karen's actions. One neighbor even said,
"She's always been a little too controlling, but I didn't know she'd go this far."
I gathered all the evidence I needed, filed a complaint with the city, and hired my own surveyors to confirm that the land was, in fact, mine. The results were clear. Karen was trying to steal my property under false pretenses, but simply exposing her wasn't enough. I wanted revenge, sweet, poetic revenge. Karen had recently poured a small fortune into landscaping her yard. I had seen her posts on social media. She was showing off her brand new stone walkway, pristine flower beds, and lush green lawn. It looked beautiful, sure, but now it was the perfect target. I called in a delivery for 6 tons of fresh manure. The delivery driver was scheduled for early in the morning when Karen would be at work. I made sure that the truck arrived just as planned. When Karen was gone, the truck dumped the manure directly onto her perfectly manicured lawn. It was a mountain of manure, enough to ruin her garden for months. The stench was unbearable. My neighbors came outside, covering their noses. A few even pulled out their phones and started filming the spectacle. One of the neighborhood kids shouted,
"Mom, is that a mountain of poop?"
It wasn't just a mess, it was a statement. I watched from the window as the pile of manure grew higher and higher. burying her flowers, her neat stone walkway, and her immaculate grass. When Karen finally returned home, she saw her yard with a pile of manure right out front. Her face turned purple with rage and she walked toward me, her fists clenched at her sides. She screamed.
Are you crazy?
I remained calm, standing there with my arms crossed. You wanted to steal my land, Karen, I said, my voice cold. Now you have new territory to deal with. Enjoy. Her eyes nearly bulged out of her head as she choked, trying to form words.
You're crazy. You've ruined it.
I just shrugged. I didn't ruin it. I just added a little fertilizer. Karen was furious. She immediately called the police, but when they arrived, I was prepared. I showed them the paperwork. Everything was in order, and the land was legally mine. There was nothing they could do. I then handed them the fake HOA paperwork and filed a formal complaint with the authorities. Within weeks, Karen's fraudulent practices were exposed. In court, she tried to justify her actions and sue me for property damage, but the judge was unmoved. My actions were completely justified. The HOA was fined for their illegal practices, and Karen was removed from her position as president. She had to clean up the mess, not just physically, but socially and professionally. No one in the neighborhood wanted anything to do with her anymore. Her perfect lawn, now ruined by manure, was a constant reminder of her greed. Karen tried to hire a manure removal service, but the prices were astronomical, and no company would take on the job without payment up front. She had no choice but to clean up the mess herself. The smell lingered for weeks. A few months later, it became clear that Karen's reign of terror was over. Her fraudulent schemes and abuse of power had caught up with her. The HOA members who had silently tolerated her tactics began to speak out, demanding accountability. They even began pushing for reforms to prevent future abuses of power. The final blow came when Karen was forced to put her home up for sale. But with the lingering smell of manure and her tarnished reputation, no one wanted to buy it. Eventually, she was forced to lower her price significantly, but even then, no offers came in. I was happy to see that Karen had finally packed up and left the neighborhood. It was like a breath of fresh air. With her gone, my life was finally back to normal, and I could focus on my home and property. I had a barbecue to celebrate. It wasn't just a win for me, it was a win for the entire neighborhood. Everyone who had silently tolerated Karen's antics had come together. My neighbors, who had been afraid to confront her before, were now speaking freely. One of them raised a glass to me. To the best revenge in HOA history, Karen had been convicted, humiliated, had to pay huge fines, and had to sell her property. Justice had been served. Write in the comments from which region you are watching this video. It is very important for us. And also, do not forget, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.